Yes, that's right, it's another Through the Lens segment, and this week we're looking at lenses. Lenses are a major contributor for getting that picture-perfect shot. Yes, there are digital settings and post-editing that can be done, but lenses offer a different variable that you just can't get anywhere else. A camera without a lens is useless. It's what focuses the light, so whatever you see through the viewfinder is what's registering on your film or sensor. Lenses come in all shapes and sizes. There's fisheye, wide angle, prime, telephoto, macro. If you can think of a shot, then there's probably a lens to fit. Their basic structure consists of a front element, a group of glass lenses split by an aperture, and at the sensor end, the rear element and lens mount. Most lenses have an exterior switch to choose between auto and manual focus. The various rings that make up the lens can be used to adjust zoom and focus. Today we're going to be talking about the 3 important things that you need to consider when using a lens: focal length, aperture, and depth of field. Focal length is the measurement of distance between the convergence point of your lens and the sensor, and is usually stated in millimeters. The basic effect of varying focal length is magnification, so zoom. The following photos were taken from the same spot but with varying focal length. All other settings in the camera were kept the same. Taken at 18, 55, 100, 200 and 300 mm, you can see that the same level of detail is captured, but a smaller portion of the scene fills the frame of the sensor. Now if we keep the subject the same in the photo at all varying focal lengths, we see a strange new effect. The higher the focal length, the more foreground and less background we see in each shot. This is a form of forced perspective. Next we move on to aperture. This is how big is the opening that's letting in light. It's important in controlling depth of field and exposure. Various apertures are measured in f-stops. This is because in the olden days, people would adjust the aperture on their camera by literally swapping out cards with holes of various sizes in them, and each of these was considered a stop. This terminology has stuck around since then. The larger the aperture, the smaller the f-stop, and vice versa. Now depth of field is the primary effect caused by the changing of the aperture. This is basically how much of the 3D space that in your scene is in focus. Let's say your subject needs to be in focus in the middle of a scene, and you've got some foreground and background. Varying the aperture will decide how much of that foreground and background appear in focus with your subject. The portion of the scene that's in focus is the extent of your depth of field. Okay, I don't think words are going to cut it, so here's an example I shot earlier. Here I am using a fixed focal length, or magnification, and all other camera settings remain the same. We are only changing the f-stops. At the lowest f-stop, so about 3 to 4, the subject is very much the only thing in focus. You have a narrow depth of field, and if I move the subject back and forth even a tiny bit, it goes out of focus. Moving up to f5 to f8, the depth of field widens, but there is still clearly some parts of the background and foreground out of focus. The maximum f-stop for this camera is 36, and at this stop, everything in shot appears in focus. Foreground right up to the camera remains sharp. Knowing techniques like this can take your photography game to the next level. Exposure is also directly linked to aperture. With the varying size of the aperture hole, this controls how much light is hitting the sensor. The larger the aperture hole, the more light that's let in. Depending on the aperture you want, you can always compensate your shots by adjusting the shutter speed and ISO settings. If you want a certain shutter speed which is quite high, like 1/1000, this is going to make your shot appear quite dark, so you can compensate by decreasing the aperture a couple of stops. And that is my beginner's guide to lenses. I could have done with this information in my early years, but oh wells. Hopefully you found this video useful, and if so, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.